Algebra 2, Module 2, Lesson 5. It's in the domain of sine and cosine to all real numbers. This wants us to calculate the sine of 480 degrees and the cosine and the sine of 480 degrees. Okay, so we know this is going to rotate around at least one time, right? Because it's more than 360. Okay, so what we would want to do, let's subtract 360. Well, that gives us 120. So it's rotated all the way around 360 degrees, and then it's went 120 more degrees, right? All right, well, just knowing that much, we can decide something. We can already decide whether the cosine and the sine are positive and negative. If it's 120 degrees, what quadrant is that in? The second quadrant, which makes the cosine what? And the cosine is negative and the sine is, okay. So the way we're going to write this, we're going to start out and say it is the opposite of the cosine, but we don't want to put 120 degrees in there because I don't know what the cosine of 120 degrees is. We want to go back to our reference angles because we know 30, 45, and 60. So this would be the reference angle what? We got to base it off of the 180 degrees, right? So 120 is 60 away from 180. So this is just simply the opposite of the cosine of a 60-degree angle. Now, for the sine, it's just going to be the same thing, right? Except it's not going to be negative because it is positive. Now, does anybody try and learn their unit circle yet? And can they tell me what the cosine of 60 is? Wait, well, which one? Sorry. What did you say? What is the cosine of a 60-degree angle? Just the cosine. Just the cosine. Don't worry about the negative and stuff. We're just looking at the cosine. The cosine is 1/2. But we want the opposite of the cosine. So this would equal a negative 1/2. Now, what's the sine of 60? Square root of 3 over 2. And we don't have to do anything with that. We just leave it because it's positive. That's all you have to do. Know what quadrant you're in. Know what your reference angle is. Those are the two keys. Okay? Now, number 2 says, explain how we calculate the sine and cosine function of a value of theta so that 540 or theta is greater than 540 degrees, but it's less than 630 degrees. Okay. So first of all, what quadrant is that going to be in? It's going to be during a second rotation, right? You've got one full rotation, so it's going to be during the second rotation. So let's just say 720 minus 630 is what? 90. So it's 630. It's got to be less than 630, but it's got to be greater than 540. So that would mean that this is going to fall in the third quadrant. Now, since we don't know theta, all we can tell is whether it's going to be a positive or a negative, right? So we would say that the sine, Well, let's go with let's call it. Let's go with cosine and sine. The sine is going to be a negative, right? Because it's to the left. But what's the same thing about the cosine? Or I mean, sine's also going to be negative, right? Because we're in the third quadrant. So that's going to equal a negative as well. So it's going to be a negative cosine of theta, and it'll be a negative sine of theta. That's it. Only thing you're going to have to do is figure out what quadrant we're in, what the reference angle is, and answer the question based off those two things. Okay?